Have you ever wondered how you became the music fan that you are today? And I'm assuming you're a music fan because you clicked on this video. I mean, what is it about the music that you've heard throughout your life, especially in your younger life, that makes up what you like today, what you buy today? It informs pretty much everything in the musical realm that you exist in right now. It's almost like your musical DNA. Have you ever thought about what is your musical DNA? Hey, so it's me, your buddy Dave, the host here at The Dark Stuff. Thanks a lot for checking out my new video. So I was watching TV the other day and I saw a commercial for one of the, I think it was like 23andMe, right? One of those DNA commercials, which, by the way, you should never do. Do not submit your DNA for free. Okay, first of all, that's a very valuable commodity for the future. Copyright your DNA, number one. Second of all you're doing is inviting a bunch of deadbeat relatives that you've never met before that live in some place you don't want to go to contact you and probably want something. It's probably best if you didn't. But that's a side point. I thought about DNA is basically 23 sets of chromosomes, and that makes up what is a person, the various combinations of those chromosomes. So I thought, let me try and equate that to music, right? What are these, say, 23 artists with 2 albums each, chromosome each, so then 46 records that make up my musical DNA. So unlike actual DNA science, this is not real science, right? So I'm just kind of winging it. So I'm saying your musical DNA begins probably when you're in junior high, 13, 14, and kind of ends maybe 23, 24. Okay? Not that you can't get into new music after that, but I'm talking about what makes you the listener you are today is stuff you heard in that period. Well, I didn't want this to seem like a ranking, so I decided to just go alphabetical. Okay, so this is going to be, here we are. Here's my musical DNA alphabetically.
That I like best. My balls are always bouncing to the left and to the right.
Okay, first up alphabetically, we're going to go with AC/DC. And this is their album, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Now, how I first encountered these guys was, they'd been around for a while. They started in the early 70s in Australia, probably about 1980 or so. I obsessively listened to the radio, and they used to play the song Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap on the radio. I was obsessed with it. I tried to tape it off the radio all the time. It was like an amazing song. Big Balls I thought was hysterical because I was 10, and I learned to really love this record and loved whenever they played AC/DC on the radio, and I wasn't even really aware that the singer died, and then they got a new singer when Back in Black came out. I was like, it's AC/DC, I like it, So I became a big record-buying AC/DC fan probably in their lean years, like 83 to like 89 was when I was in there. And if you know the catalog, there were some pretty crappy AC/DC records released during that point. But this is when I got into them. This is when they became significant to me. I have never gotten tired of hearing AC/DC. I could play those Bon Scott records just over and over and over on repeat. And if you check out my best live albums video, my If You Want Blood, AC/DC's If You Want Blood was my number 2 best live album of all time. All right, next up alphabetically, we're looking at the Bangles. They've been in my videos a lot lately. This is their debut album, All Over the Place. This is a 10 out of 10. It's fantastic. It's the best album they ever did. The other part of the DNA, I'm using the Different Light album, which I did have on vinyl. I don't know what happened to it. Anyways, this was the major mainstream breakthrough for the band. So more people are familiar with this, but this is truly the best. The Bangles, of course, started in Los Angeles in 1980, 81 or so, something like that. They were very, very influenced by 60s psychedelic music, by groups like the Beatles and the Byrds and groups like that, Mamas and the Papas. But because of the time they were coming out, they also had this kind of punky energy, and a lot of the vibe that was going on in Los Angeles was around the punk scene at the same time that they were going. I mean, the Bangles were never a punk band. They were just a very good, like, energetic punky kind of rock band, but they weren't really a punk band by any means. I talked about this in another video. They're a group that single-handedly shifted my musical taste. I mean, I can point to the fact that I heard this record. All I listened to at the time in 1984 was metal, and then my taste shifted. Okay, opened up my world to a whole lot of other stuff, and that definitely stemmed from the Bangles, from when I first heard them. Okay, you might not be able to tell from looking at me, but I am a pretty serious hip-hop fan. I like old school stuff. I mean, that's probably due to my age. I was listening to rap as early as the mid-'80s, and being a white kid from suburban Nebraska, I think I should get a little pat on the back for that. Maybe not. I don't know. Do I deserve it? No. I don't need a pat on the back for that. But this next group was my gateway into a lot of hip-hop, and that is the Beastie Boys. They're absolutely part of my DNA, unavoidable. Beastie Boys weren't the first rap that I heard. I would say that was probably Run DMC or maybe Kool Moe Dee or somebody like that. And then you get into Paul's Boutique, which is just a masterpiece of production and sampling. And the rhymes they come up with are so genius. They're genius on multiple levels. Up would be we're still in the B's. We're talking Chuck Berry, and I'm pulling out this one first. This is the Hail Hail Rock and Roll soundtrack, because this was my real exposure to Chuck Berry. So obviously, just being a student of rock and roll, you know, that's where I heard all of the Chuck Berry classics. But I think it was when I saw the movie Hail Hail Rock and Roll, which was the story, the behind the scenes of this big concert that Chuck did in like 1987. Keith Richards was in it. He was the band leader. They had all these great appearances, people like Linda Ronstadt, Robert Cray, Julian Lennon, Etta James, Eric Clapton. Fuck him, who cares? I shouldn't have even mentioned it. Fantastic, okay? So I loved it, but that wasn't just Chuck Berry doing the songs. They had all these other singers. So gradually I started getting different things. The Great 28 is a fantastic collection. This one's really good too. It's just called One Dozen Berries. You call yourself a rock fan and you don't like Chuck Berry, then I don't take you seriously. Okay, the next element in my musical DNA, we're going to go with Black Sabbath. But I'm going to also choose Ozzy at the same time. Okay, I'm going to include both of them because I heard it all at the same time. Like I said earlier, I listened to the radio a lot. And old school Black Sabbath, especially stuff off Sabbath 4, I mean, this has Supernaut, Snowblind, Tomorrow's Dream, Changes, a lot of great songs on there. I used to hear Paranoid. I used to hear, all the songs off the first album, etc., all over the radio. But when I got into that music, Ozzy had already gone solo. Black Sabbath had Dio. And at the time, I didn't listen to that. That's a whole other story. I love the Dio stuff with Black Sabbath. But at the time, I was just like, okay, Sabbath's a part of the past. Now I'm part of Ozzy. Now I'm all about Ozzy. And Ozzy was a huge part of my 80s. He was the gateway between the classic 70s hard rock and 80s. The 80s hard rock that I listened to, the Motley Crue and Rat and all of the stuff that I loved in the mid-80s, it stems really from this. I mean, this was the stuff that showed that kind of music was commercially viable still in the 80s, opened up a lot of doors. Plus, it's just fucking fantastic. I mean, every song is great. I Don't Know, Crazy Train, Goodbye to Romance, Suicide Solution, Mr. Crowley, I mean, every song is good on that. So there you go, Black Sabbath and Ozzy. I saw Ozzy numerous times as a solo artist. I got to meet him once, very briefly, back on the No More Tours tour. And I did finally see Black Sabbath with Ozzy on their The End tour back in 2016. She's got her head down tight. Yeah, I've actually referred to this next artist, Cheap Trick, before in other videos as part of my musical DNA. Okay, I did a great video a few years back with a friend of mine where we discussed all of the Cheap Trick records of the 80s, and in it, I kind of said that Cheap Trick was part of my musical DNA, and my friend who was on the show, Chris, he also kind of agreed. It is part of it. Cheap Trick blends so many elements of what I love and what made me the music fan I am today. There is the harder rock stuff. There is that edge. They did used to play with bands like Kiss and AC/DC. They also have that Beatle-y power pop sound, which I loved too. The band Kiss started, they wanted to be a hard rock Beatles, but really it was Cheap Trick that achieved that goal of being the hard rock Beatles. They absolutely were. I can't remember specifically when I first heard Cheap Trick, but I do know that this album, 1982's One on One, was the first one that I ever bought, and it is still probably my favorite of all Cheap Trick records, even more so than Budokan or In Color or the first album or whatever. I mean, I love all that stuff, and if you watch my 80s video, you'll see how much of the 80s stuff I actually like too. It's not just the 70s stuff. Next element in the musical DNA, we're at the letter D, and here is Dinosaur Jr. This is their 1991 album Green Mind. Not their debut, it's actually their fourth album, first on a major label, and it was my first real exposure to Dinosaur Jr. You know, 1991, I was 20 years old, huge year for music, groundbreaking. We all know what happened with Nirvana and everything. But, you know, just as important as Nirvana Nevermind to me that year was Green Mind by Dinosaur Jr. The other element of it I'm using is the 1987 album You're Living All Over Me. Actually, the best album of theirs. Production is a little muddled, but I love it because I can deal with lo-fi production. I don't whine about shit like that, but some people do. So bigger production, of course, you want to go with this. But Jay Mascis's vibe, I mean, he was this like quiet, shy guitar hero. I mean, just a menace on the guitar, just phenomenal. One of the best players to emerge in the last 30 or 40 years without question. He had this totally different, unique perspective and persona. He seemed really shy and he barely talked, and he was, a lot of his songs are just, he was like real lovelorn and had trouble connecting and everything. And it's just like, I don't know, I could relate to that a lot, especially when I first got into Dinosaur Jr. And I've just been a fan ever since. I have seen Dinosaur a number of times, especially since they've come back. You know, they broke up at the end of the 90s. They got back together about 2005 or so. And I've probably seen them 4 or 5 times since then. And great every time. It's all the original 3. Gotta love it. D. Dinosaur Jr. Right, the 8th element of my 23, we're at the letter F, and here is Faith No More. This is the album The Real Thing from 1989. It was their breakthrough. My actual favorite album right here would be Angel Dust. This is from 1992. This is a Japanese CD that has the extra track, Midnight Cowboy, at the end. It's really good. It's been on other stuff since then, but... So, Faith No More, not only are they more important than they're generally given credit for, I was just addressing what happened in 1991, you know, the alternative breakthrough and the changing of the guard in terms of music goes, and a lot of the old guard was sort of pushed out of the way. The new guard was sort of ushered in. And Nirvana gets a ton of that credit. And, you know, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, etc. And those groups deserve it because they did have that breakthrough. But a few years before them was Faith No More. They mixed, you know, hip-hop and hard rock and punk and avant-garde, just weird stuff, and they pushed it all together and made this really unique and great sound. I never got to see them with their original singer, Chuck Mosley, but I did see Chuck, strangely enough, fronting a version of Bad Brains a few years later, but that's a side note. This album changed my fucking world when it came out. And so much so that I started changing kind of how I dressed. I mean, Mike Patton used to have this t-shirt which was like the Looney Tunes logo, and I went and found a t-shirt like that because I saw him wearing it. So after having that big hit with The Real Thing, they followed it up with an extreme, boundary-pushing, just genre-bending, fantastic album. The last to feature their guitar player, Jim Martin, who really was missed after he left or was fired, whatever. He claims to not like this album, but his playing on here is part of why it's so good. element is Firehose. Now, I purposely decided, unlike my Black Sabbath Ozzy one, where I wanted to make sure I got everybody included because I heard them at the same time, I definitely heard Firehose first. And because they never get any credit when people talk about Mike Watt, they always just talk about the Minutemen, and I love the Minutemen, okay? I really do. But they were a little bit before my time. Firehose was in my time, okay? I was able to see Firehose many times. It's still 2/3 of the Minutemen, it's just different guitar player and singer, and really took on a different sort of a vibe. I think every one of their albums is great, but I've chosen as my representatives for the DNA portion here is the first album, Ragin' Full On, which is just great start to finish. Little closer to the Minutemen sound than what they would do much later on. Got a lot of great lyrics from Kira Rossler, former bass player of Black Flag. She was married to Watt at the time. And then I would go with a jump up a few years later to Flyin' the Flannel. I know this is controversial among Firehose fans. People don't like it. I was going back and forth between From Ohio and this, but I went with this. By the way, I got autographed there. Okay. I went with this one because I did kind of like the harder edge on the guitar. Plus, every song is great. It introduced me to the music of Daniel Johnston with their cover of Walkin' the Cow. Every song is good on here. They were ahead of the curve on calling out misogyny in music with the song Anti-Misogyny Maneuver. The song Down with the Bass is just a testament to how phenomenal a player Mike Watt is. Whenever people talk about Mike Watt, they talk about the Minutemen, and they never mention Firehose. And it's a real point of contention for me because it ticks me off because I like Firehose just much. I even confronted Mike Watt on that. Confronted is a strong word, but I asked Mike Watt last time I saw him in concert. I was like, hey, how come you don't ever even just throw in like a Firehose song? Like Making the Freeway, you could throw that into your set. It would fit perfectly. And he kind of looked at me, paused for a second, and then he gave me some line about how he doesn't really play the bass that way like he did in Firehose, and so that's why he doesn't include those songs. I don't know. That doesn't pass the smell test, but whatever. Firehose is the number 9 element, the 9th element of my musical DNA. Okay, next up, we're going to H. We're going to go to Juliana Hatfield, and this is her debut solo album called Hey Babe. Came out in 1992. And this was my introduction to her. She'd been in a band called the Blake Babies for the previous few years. I just kind of became familiar with them right around the time that this came out, so I wasn't really, I couldn't say that I knew that much about them at the time. Currently in indie music, I hear so many groups that are, whether intentionally or not, heavily influenced by Juliana Hatfield. She had the high, real pretty voice, very sing-songy, but she had kind of darker lyrics, catchier songs, but she dealt with some real topics that were not present in a lot of pop music, even alternative pop music, in the 1990s when she made her name. For the other component of the DNA for Juliana Hatfield, I chose one of her most recent albums, and this is her doing the songs of Olivia Newton-John. I chose this because maybe it's not my favorite of Juliana's albums, but this is the sort of thing that reestablished her in the modern era. People started paying attention again. I've been paying attention the whole time, just FYI. But when she started doing this, and this is part of her musical DNA. She was showing a side of her that not everyone else knew. It got me to actually appreciate the music of Olivia Newton-John, which I never had growing up. All right, the next element, we're at the letter H. We're talking Hüsker Dü. Now, I feel like this one's pretty obvious that they were going to be on this list. I mean, I've been on the radio for over 18 years at this point. My show is called New Day Rising. I got that from the album New Day Rising and from the song New Day Rising. Obviously, that had a major impact on me. The two elements that I chose, or the two albums that I chose, are 1984's New Day Rising and 1985's Flip Your Wig. These two albums perfectly represent Hüsker Dü. Okay, there is New Day Rising still holds to some of the the punk and the hardcore energy that they had prior, while Flip Your Wig is straight on power pop, and you can see how they transitioned from one into the other. Hüsker Dü were the Beatles of punk rock. Okay, they started off in one distinct style, groundbreaking, and then by the end of their run 7 years later, they were doing something completely different, almost unrecognizable from their beginning, just as groundbreaking, similar to the Beatles, I would say. So from Hüsker Dü, I mean, God, they inspired everything. They're the reason why there's the Pixies. There's a reason why there's a Nirvana. There's a reason why so much of the 90s music that I listened to. I then went on and followed the Bob Mould's career, all of his solo stuff, and Sugar, and all the stuff that he's done, and Grant Hart, and Nova Mob. I mean, I saw Nova Mob so many times, seen Bob Mould so many times. I've got to meet and hang out with all three of the former members of Hüsker Dü, at least minimally, over the years. Great stuff. Next up, Jane's Addiction. Now, similarly to what I said when I was talking about, here's it is on CD, when I was talking about Faith No More and being one of these bands that was ahead of the curve in terms of changing of the guard of music, that was absolutely Jane's Addiction. More so than anyone, more so than even Faith No More. This album was the biggest game changer of the late 80s, in my opinion. No one ever sounded like Jane's Addiction before, and no one has ever sounded like this again. From just the phenomenal guitar playing of Dave Navarro, the incredible bass lines from Eric Avery, the very unique and tribal style drumming that Stephen Perkins adds to the mix. He does not just keep the beat, okay? It is a completely other element when he's doing the drums. And Perry Farrell, with his heavily effect-laden voice and all the weird sounds that he came up with and the cool kind of sloganeering that he was used for lyrics in the early days, his lyrics were never deep, but they sounded cool back in the day. So I don't currently know what's going on with Jane's Addiction. For a long time, Eric Avery was out of the band. They had a different bass player. Now Eric Avery came back, and now Dave Navarro seems to magically be gone. They're not really giving an answer as to why he's not there. They're saying he's long COVID or something, but I don't know that I necessarily believe that. They have Josh Klinghoffer, who is a recent Red Hot Chili Peppers guitar player, as the guitar player now. So I don't know, missing that element. But Jane's Addiction, man, there was never anything like those four guys. It was only a matter of time till we got here. Here it is, Kiss. You know they're part of my musical DNA. If this is not your first time at the channel, you definitely know this. I'm choosing the Kiss Alive album as my representation. This is the quintessential 70s live album. It is the best live album ever made. And as the other component, I'm choosing Lick It Up. Yeah, strange, but this is the album without the makeup. This is when I really got into the band. I knew about them before, but this is when my fandom kicked into high gear. It was the era of MTV. And because Kiss took the makeup off, whereas they had been considered kind of has-beens a little bit beforehand, the media and MTV gave them a fresh look when Lick It Up came out. So the combination of those two things were the reason why I chose these two. But really, this is the quintessential Kiss. Every single note of it is great. The drum solo is a little long, but whatever. Why? Instead of it being a 10 out of 10, maybe a 9.9, whatever. Kiss is my favorite band of all time. That's why this is such a significant record to me, such a significant artist. It's obvious. I've seen them in concert many times, going back to 1984 when I saw them for the first time on the Lick It Up tour. I was also present at the first ever reunion show at Tiger Stadium in 1996. Love them, love them, love them. What else can I say? I've got a whole playlist of other Kiss videos where I talk about them in a lot more detail. 14th element here, 14th set of chromosomes in my metaphor here is Motörhead. This is their album No Sleep Till Hammersmith. Great live album from the early 80s. The album features the classic Motörhead of the 80s, which was Lemmy, Fast Eddie Clarke, and Filthy Animal Taylor on the drums. It is phenomenal. Motörhead is really the bridge band between punk rock and metal, and I got into them 87, 88 or so through the records they were putting out at that time. They came into my world at the perfect time because I was moving out of sort of metal strictly and moving more into punk and alternative and stuff like that. And Motörhead was a band that perfectly melded those two worlds. They were fantastic. They had the energy and the aggression of punk, but they were also heavy like metal, and maybe lifestyle-wise they were a little bit more on the metal side. I don't know. About 22 years ago or so, I sold all my Motörhead vinyl in a really bad decision when I was needing money. It's almost like a phantom limb sometimes. I go back to grab them like, oh, where's my Orgasmatron vinyl? Only to realize I don't actually have it anymore. And re-getting all that stuff would be way too expensive. So representing the second part of my Motörhead thing, I'm just going to use these two best ofs. Best of Volume 1 and 2. This has everything going up to about 93, 94 or so. Right along, we're at the 15th set of musical chromosomes here, and I'm coming with Pavement. So this is the double disc Slanted and Enchanted, the expanded edition. I'm also putting the double disc Crooked Rain. These two albums, 92, 94, just, oh man, I became so obsessed with this band and this kind of music. They were sort of my gateway into what became what was a big thing for me was lo-fi music, where I got into Sabbath and Guided by Voices and all this other stuff. And really, Slanted and Enchanted does kind of fit that lo-fi thing, but this one really doesn't. They've already kind of moved past that. But this album just shook me. I loved it. I bought every 7-inch, every EP, everything from Pavement. Still have them back there. Loved this stuff to death. All these bonus tracks already had them. Earlier on, and when we were at the B section, I did mention the Beastie Boys, and they are hardly the only hip hop that I grew up listening to. That's part of the DNA. Public Enemy, obviously a part of it. Here is It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. This was the first one that I heard. And this album, again, it shook me, okay? I've talked about this in previous videos. This album so informed my worldview, made me see things in a just completely new way. I grew up with liberal, tolerant parents, and I wasn't taught racism or anything in the house, but I did grow up in the public schools in Nebraska, and there's just a lot of stuff I didn't hear about, growing up. The other one I chose was this one, Apocalypse 91, The Enemy Strikes Black. I chose that over Fear of a Black Planet because I just like this one better. I like the sound. This is slamming, okay? So is this one. I think Fear of a Black Planet's a little flat. I like the music, but I just think that sonically it's just not nearly as good. And so much of what's great about Public Enemy is you're getting this education. You're getting bombarded with a lot of really important information done with the best rap voice ever, in my opinion, Chuck D. But also, you're getting this really intense music that is just making all these crazy noises and these pounding beats, and it's like relentless. And it is music that you can't passively listen to. You can't put it on in the background and write a term paper or work on a project. It sucks you in and makes you a part of it. So Public Enemy is not background music in any way. I still think they are the creme de la creme of hip-hop. Are the Ramones. And I'm using this Ramones Mania because this is actually the first time that my first real introduction to the Ramones. I probably saw them on MTV. I'm pretty sure that I did with videos, psychotherapy and stuff like that, maybe some earlier videos. But when I was about 17, a friend and I started a music magazine, not knowing how complicated that was, but we were 17, we did an issue, and we did one issue, and then we sent it out to all the record labels, to all the publicists, and we were on mailing lists for years getting records. And even though it was pretty much mostly heavy metal that we wrote about, a lot of the publicists just sent whatever they had. And I got this Ramones Mania one day, threw it on, and again, it changed my whole world. I loved every song on this, and this was such an education for me. So this includes everything from their beginnings all the way to about 1987 or so, and it was just so eye-opening. I chose this one as my second part for the Ramones, Subterranean Jungle. And I chose this one because I do like Outsider. Psychotherapy was probably the first Ramones song I ever heard. And I just like this one a lot. Outsider, a little bit of soul, good stuff. Maybe not my favorite, but I think in terms of shaping my DNA, this one would be the one. And again, Ramones Mania is really the one, but that was what got me there. Only a matter of time before the replacements came into the mix. We're at the letter R here, so this is the number 18 of my 23 elements. And this is the Pleased to Meet Me box set. I didn't actually have it on vinyl, but the other one represented was this. They came into my world probably about 1987. Pleased to Meet Me was the first new album of theirs that I heard. Everything else had already come out when I started getting into them. I think it's easy to say that Paul Westerberg is the best songwriter of the 80s. The guy's music meant so much to me and was so powerful and so impactful on me growing up. And I really like every album. I like Don't Tell a Soul. I like All Shook Down. I'm not a big nitpicker. I don't think they have to be drunk all the time to be good. I remember exactly when I first heard the Replacements. It was this album, and I went into Homer's Records, and they were playing it. I was a Kiss fan. They were playing the cover of Black Diamond. Kiss's Black Diamond came on, and I was just like, what? You know, I bought it, and I didn't like it at first, but slowly my musical taste changed, and the Replacements are the benchmark. I mean, when I mentioned Cheap Trick, it's like Cheap Trick, the Replacements, Kiss. Almost every band has to have some element of that in order for me to like it. I'm realizing this as I'm talking to you. Now we're still in the R's. This is Rolling Stones. They're absolutely part of my DNA, my musical DNA. And I chose this Still Life because this is sort of the first one I heard. Came out when I was 10 or 11. I remember my friend Bart at the time, we used to listen to this album a lot. You know, he had the tape and we used to listen to it. And then I ended up getting Tattoo You, the last great Stones album, in my opinion. Ever since I was 10 and I got into the Stones, I've liked them consistently. I've seen the Stones in concert a couple of times. I have a great video about when I got lost in Oakland, seeing them back in '89. I've seen Keith Richards solo. Phenomenal. I don't need to tell you anything else about the Stones, right? All right, next up, we're at S, Sonic Youth. This is the album Dirty. This is a band that and I'm using this one, Washing Machine, this is my actual favorite Sonic Youth album. I got into them probably about 1990 or so. I think the first album I heard was Goo, but I had heard of them prior, but I don't really think I heard any of the music. They were another one of those groundbreaking bands, but they never had that sort of level of success like a Nirvana or Jane's Addiction or Faith No More. So they've always been more of an underground thing, but they are without a doubt the most influential group of the late 80s, early 90s. And my radio show, New Day Rising, closes with a Sonic Youth song every time. For 18 years, it's always closed with a Sonic Youth song. The dissonance, the noise, the unique lyrical perspective, their weird obsessions with stuff, people like Karen Carpenter and stuff. I mean, Sonic Youth set the bar. They were great up until they ended in 2011. I was never more disappointed by the personal behavior of someone in the band that caused that breakup, because I think they would still be making great music today. And I think the reunion chances are about 0. So Sonic Youth. We're getting pretty close here. So we're still in the S's here. We got Superchunk. This is No Pocky for Kitty. This is their second album. I did a catalog ranking video of Superchunk, and spoiler alert, this was my number 1. That's why I held it up. But I did say in the video that if compilations counted, this would actually be my favorite Superchunk album. This is incidental music, 91 to 95. This is singles and B-sides from that period, and it is phenomenal. Phenomenal. Okay, there is no better singles band from the 90s than Superchunk. They were it for me. Their music was fantastic. Their personal just ethics and behavior is very admirable, and I love that stuff about them. Starting Merge Records is so significant. So yeah, no question, Superchunk. And look, he's wearing a Kiss shirt on the back of that. I mean, come on, right? almost there. We're at the end of the alphabet here. V, Van Halen. Of course, representing here with the self-titled debut and 1984. The last album of the original run of Van Halen. When I said how Jane's Addiction did the album of the 90s, but they did it in 1988. Well, Van Halen did the 80s in 1978. Okay? They set the blueprint for everything that came from hard rock in the 80s with this one album. And it is gold. I don't think Van Halen really made a bad track in their original run. I'll throw you up to 1984. Great stuff. I like A Different Kind of Truth. That was the comeback album with Roth. Phenomenal. Van Hagar, I'll leave. I saw Van Halen a couple of times. I saw them in 1984, back when I was a little kid, and then saw them in '88 with Hagar. Saw Roth solo a couple of times, and then I saw a reunited Van Halen in 2007 or 2008 with Wolfgang on bass. Still great. Nothing to complain about. But it has to be Roth, otherwise I'm just completely not interested. The combination of Eddie Van Halen and Roth, that's what made Van Halen. That's what made it.
When I say I love you, you say you better.
All right, here it is, the 23rd element. You've been waiting all this time. It's W, The Who. I'm showing you Face Dances because this is one of my favorite Who records. I love this. And here's Who's Next. This is widely considered to be their best from 1971. This is from 1981. I remember hearing You Better You Bet on the radio and instantly needing to go to a store and getting that. I bought the 45 for You Better You Bet. Loved it. Got this album later. I still love it. Every song is great. I constantly read reviews where this album is trashed as one of the worst Who albums. I don't get it. I don't really get it. But most of the other Who stuff I like because all predates this. But just the bombast of the band. I mean, the way that those guys played, Keith Moon and John Entwistle, phenomenal. Okay, then the three of them with Pete Townsend just were so great as a band. Then you look at the lyrics and that unique sort of sensitivity that Pete Townsend had in his lyrics, and the concept albums that they were doing, and then when they would just not do a concept album and just do a rocker or whatever, it was always great. They drifted a bit in the 80s, and I don't really know, in the 70s, and then they kind of came back. You know, the Who had a major impact on punk rock, and a lot of groups I liked were very influenced by the Who, groups like the Sex Pistols and the Jam. So their stuff continued on. You can see the DNA of this into this other stuff, which I ended up taking on. So the Who were just a big part of it. Plus, this is one of the first albums I ever bought with my own money, and that absolutely counts for something, right? All right, everybody, thanks a lot for watching. This has been my musical DNA. I don't know that this is going to spawn anything, but if it does, I'd like to see yours. Thank you so much.